So you slide up to that B note on the G string, 16th fret. Then you walk up chromatically from the 14th, 15th to 16th fret on the B string. Then you go up to the E string and you play the 14th, 16th, and 17th fret. So that whole thing is... Then he does a trill on that from the 16th to the 17th, pull back off to the 16th, and pull off to the 14th, all on the E string. So that's... So that whole thing goes... Then you walk back down chromatically on the B string from the 16th fret, 15th fret to the 14th fret. Then you just walk down a scale from that 16th fret on the G string to the 14th to the 13th, all on the G string. Then he pivots back off from that 13th fret to the 14th fret, back to the 13th fret on the G string. So the whole thing is... Then he goes down to the 16th fret on the D string. Then he hammers on and off from the 13th to 14th, back to the 13 on the G string. So that whole thing... Actually, before he does any of that, I'm sorry, I missed a note. When he walks down chromatically, instead of walking down the scale there, he pivots back off of the 13th fret or 14th fret of the B string back to the 16th fret. So, sorry, I missed that. It was... So that's the pivot from the B string to the G string. 14th fret to 16th fret. Then he walks down the scale, pivots off those two notes, goes down to the D string on the 16th fret, and then he hammers on and off the 13, 14, back to 13 on the G string, pivots back down to that 16th fret on the D string. So that whole thing is... Then he goes back up to that 13th fret on the G string. Then he plays the 14th fret on the G string and hammers on and off to the 16th fret. And goes back down to that 13th fret on the G string. So the whole thing is... Then he goes back down to the... Yep. And he goes back down to that, sorry, I lose track after a while. He goes back down to that 16th fret on the D string, and then he goes to the 13th fret on the G string, plays the 16th fret of the G string, and bends that up a whole step, and it's kind of like, it's with a pinch harmonic. So it's... And then he slides off. Now the next part he goes into, he plays the 16th fret, 17th fret, and 18th fret on the D string. Then the 16th fret on the D string, and the 16th fret on the B string. So it could be looked as an arpeggio, like a B minor arpeggio, starting on the major third. So. Then he hammers on from that 16th fret to the 18th fret, back to the 16th fret on the G string. So that whole thing is... And after he hammers on and off that, he goes to the 16th fret to the 14th fret of the D string. So then he goes up to that, after he walks up this... slides from the 18th fret to the 20th fret back down to the 18th fret on the G string. So that's... When he slides back down, he pulls off to that 16th fret of the... all on the G string. So it's sliding up from the 18 to 20, slide back down to the 18, pull off to the 16, all on the G string. So that's... Then he hits that 18th fret on the G string twice. Then he pulls off to the 16th fret, all on the G string. Then he goes down to the 18th fret of the D string. So that's... And then he does the 19th fret on the B string, and he hits that twice and bends it up a whole step. And then he slides up and slides down on that string. Now, then he gets into this section, and we're going to go back to that scale part, because that's where he combines two scales, and it's really a cool way of thinking of scales. But then it goes back to the A chord. That was all over the B chord. Then he goes on this A chord, he really starts outlining the A dominant 7 tonality. In fact, both this section and the next section, he really outlines the A dominant and the B dominant very well. So this part goes... And what's going on there is he's playing the 5th fret of the D string, and that's the 7th, the flat 7 of A. So that's, and he's pivoting off of that note and the 6th fret of the G string, which is the major third. So you have your flat 7 and your major third, which gives you the tonality of the dominant 7. So then he pivots off from that 6th fret to the 7th fret on the G string. And that's going from that major third to the 4th or the 11th. So that whole thing is... So the 5th fret of the D string, the 6th fret of the G string, back to this 5th fret of the D string, to the 6, 7, 6 on the G string. So that whole section is... Then it goes back down to that 5th fret on the D string, pivots back off of that 6th fret of the G string, goes back down to the 5th fret of the D string, then it climbs up from the 6th fret to the 7th fret on the G string, and then it plays the 7th fret on the B string and bends that up a half step with the pinch harmonic. So that whole section is... Then he slides up and down again. He kind of does that little sliding thing a lot. Now, again, that's something that I would just really try and get that groove and feel it out. And there's a lot of palm muting going on until that very end where there's the pinch harmonic. So it's... Now, if you don't palm mute that, you're going to get those notes ringing together, which might be a cool rhythm riff. But in this lead line, you really want to accentuate those individual notes. So, and play with muting and rolling off that mute so that you get some muted notes, some not so muted notes. And then he goes into, he plays the 7th fret on the B string, bends that up and down a half step, pulls off to the 5th fret of the B string, plays that the 7th fret again, I'm sorry, so it's... Then he bends that 5th fret on the G string up a half step. And he pivots off on the D string from the 7th fret to the 5th fret and back to the 7th fret. So that whole thing is... so that's... So just work with that phrasing. It's again, it's very simple notes. It's right out of what essentially could be a dominant pentatonic scale kind of thing, where this is your A minor pentatonic, but instead you're throwing in that major third instead of the minor third on the G string. And then he's playing that 6th note on the B string and bending that up to that flat 7. That's your minor pentatonic. This is kind of like a dominant pentatonic. And this is the dominant pentatonic with that 6 in there. So mess around with those notes. It's really cool to put one note in at a time every once in a while and really target notes. But the main thing I wanted to get at with this was he's really, like I said, outlining from the minor 7 to the major 3rd, which outlines that dominant chord. And sliding up to that even gives you that dominant 7. So then when it goes to the B chord, which is up a whole step, he starts doing a very similar thing on that chord, but this time using B dominant pentatonic. So here he goes... And here, again, he slides into the minor 7 of this B chord, and the first 2 notes he hits is the major 3rd, the minor 7 and the major 3rd of that B chord. So you go from to, which just totally brings out the tonalities of that chord. So you slide up to the 7th fret on the D string, then you play the 8th fret on the G string, then you go back down to that 7th fret of the D string and you play the 9th fret of the G string. So, and he's sliding in between those notes. So I don't think he does it on all the notes, but like those first 2 notes, I don't think he uses the slide. But then when he starts doing these 6 intervals, when he starts doing those, he slides into those. And those 6 intervals are slide into the 7th fret of the D string, skip the B string, and you play the 7th fret of the B string. And then you do that up a whole step. So you slide into the 9th fret of the D string to the 9th fret of the B string. So that's... Then you go up another 6th interval from the 8th fret of the G string to the 7th fret of the B string. So that's... actually just does, after that sixth interval there, he goes to the 10th fret of the G string and the 10th fret of the E string. And then he plays the 11th fret of the G string to the 11th fret of the E string. So that's... And now you could fill in those chords with also the 9th fret on the B string to the 10th fret of the B string. So, and I think he actually does that on that second chord, but on the first one he doesn't. So that whole thing is... Or actually might. Now, so that's that whole phrase. And again, that perfectly outlines that B dominant chord by doing this minor 7 to the major 3rd, then to the 4th. Then he slides up here, and here. Then here it's again the major 3rd to the root. And then this is kind of like a diminished thing to the dominant chord. Which, if you look at that last chord that he falls on, which are these 3 notes, but if you put that note in there, that's just your root, 5th, dominant 7, and major 3rd. And if you look at the octaves there, so that's the root, right? That's your 5th. This note here is the same note there, that's your dominant 7. And then this note is your major 3rd. So you have... That's why it just all sounds perfect. So that whole thing... And then he just ends on a D chord.